The most dangerous cyberweapons in history were not built by criminals. They were built by the United States government, stolen from the government, and then used to attack hospitals, banks, and shipping companies across 150 countries. In 2017, 2 separate attacks caused more combined damage than any cyber attack before them, and both of them ran on tools that the NSA had secretly built, quietly hoarded, and failed to keep secure. This is not a story about hackers being clever. This is a story about how the agency responsible for protecting American digital infrastructure accidentally became the most dangerous weapons supplier in the history of cyber warfare. To understand how this happened, you need to go back to a group called the Shadow Brokers, an online persona that appeared in August 2016 claiming to have stolen the NSA's most elite hacking toolkit. The NSA unit they claimed to have targeted was called Tailored Access Operations, the agency's in-house team of expert hackers, and one of the most sophisticated cyber intelligence units ever documented by a commercial security research firm. That firm, in a 2015 report, described the group's operational methods as unlike anything they had seen, consistent with a level of resources and technical sophistication that pointed directly to a nation-state actor, and specifically to NSA operational patterns. The Shadow Brokers tried to auction the stolen tools publicly on Tumblr and Pastebin, asking for payment in Bitcoin. Nobody paid. The auction failed, but instead of disappearing, the Shadow Brokers shifted strategy. In January 2017, they released a first batch of files that named internal NSA operations, and independent analysts who reviewed the code confirmed it was not fake. The scripting patterns, the naming conventions, the internal logic all matched genuine NSA tradecraft. Then on April 14, 2017, the Shadow Brokers released everything, a massive dump of exploit code they called Lost in Translation, including a tool called EternalBlue. EternalBlue was an exploit targeting a vulnerability in a Microsoft file-sharing protocol called SMBv1, Server Message Block version 1, which had been built into virtually every version of Windows since Windows 95. The vulnerability itself, cataloged as CVE 2017-144, allowed an attacker to send a specially crafted packet to any Windows machine running SMBv1, execute code remotely, and then use that same machine to automatically scan for and infect every other vulnerable machine on the same network, with no further human action required. In other words, EternalBlue could spread entirely on its own, walking from one machine to every other machine it could reach like a digital wildfire. And because SMBv1 was decades old and baked into millions of systems, the potential spread was almost unlimited. Microsoft had actually released a patch for the vulnerability on March 14, 2017, weeks before the Shadow Brokers released the code publicly. But patch rates across hospitals, government systems, and older corporate networks were terrible. Most of those systems were running the same old Windows versions they had been running for years, because updating meant downtime, and downtime meant money. On the morning of May 12, 2017, less than a month after the Shadow Brokers leak, a piece of malware called WannaCry detonated across the internet. It used EternalBlue to spread automatically, encrypted the files on every machine it reached, and then displayed a ransom message demanding Bitcoin payment in exchange for the decryption key. Within 24 hours, it had infected more than 200,000 machines across 150 countries, and the damage was not abstract. The UK's National Health Service was hit harder than any other single organization in the world. At least 80 hospital trusts and thousands of GP practices lost access to their systems, and roughly 19,000 appointments were canceled in those first critical days. Wards lost access to MRI scanners, pathology databases, prescription systems, and theater booking software. Some hospitals had to divert ambulances for days because they simply could not function. The NHS's direct recovery cost from WannaCry alone was reported at approximately £92 million. Other major victims included Telefonica in Spain, Renault in France, FedEx, Honda, Nissan, Deutsche Bahn, the German National Railway, the Russian Interior Ministry, and a Chinese university entrance examination system. The attack stopped, almost by accident, when a 22-year-old British security researcher writing under the name Malware Tech noticed that WannaCry was checking for a specific domain name before it executed its payload. The domain was long, meaningless, and unregistered, a kill switch built into the malware, probably as a research safety mechanism, that the attackers had forgotten to remove. Malware Tech registered the domain for a few dollars, and the registration halted new infections almost immediately, buying the world the window it needed to start patching. WannaCry was later officially attributed to North Korea's Lazarus Group by the UK, the US, and several allies. And in September 2018, the U.S. Department of Justice indicted a North Korean programmer named Park Jin-hyok in connection with the attack. He has never appeared in a Western court and remains at large. But WannaCry was not even the worst of what came next. 6 weeks later, on June 27, 2017, a second attack called NotPetya detonated, and this one made WannaCry look restrained. NotPetya also used EternalBlue, the same stolen NSA tool, but its goal was not ransom, it was destruction. It displayed a ransom message, but technical analysis showed it had no mechanism to actually restore files for payment. The ransom screen was theater, a disguise, while underneath the malware simply destroyed the data on every disk it reached. The total damage from NotPetya is estimated at more than $10 billion, making it the most economically destructive cyber attack in recorded history at the time. The shipping company Maersk, the largest container shipping company in the world, handling approximately 1/5 of the world's seaborne freight, reported losses between $200 and $300 million, with 45,000 PCs and 4,000 servers completely destroyed or wiped across 150 countries. Maersk had to operate its shipping terminals manually for weeks, using paper slips on trucks and whiteboards at the gates, because every digital system was gone. The pharmaceutical giant Merck reported losses of around $870 million. FedEx's European subsidiary TNT Express reported around $400 million in losses. The French building materials company Saint-Gobain reported about $250 million in production disruption. Maersk's recovery became a textbook case study in incident response. And the reason the company survived at all comes down to a single piece of extraordinary luck. One Microsoft Active Directory domain controller, essentially the master key for the entire network, survived the attack in a remote Maersk office in Ghana because it happened to be offline during a local power outage at the exact moment NotPetya hit. Engineers flew the recovery data out of Ghana by hand courier, and the entire Maersk network was rebuilt from scratch in approximately 10 days. NotPetya was attributed by the United States, the United Kingdom, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand to the GRU, Russian military intelligence, specifically to a unit known as Sandworm. In October 2020, the U.S. Department of Justice indicted 6 named GRU officers in connection with the attack. None of them have faced trial. The attack appears to have been aimed primarily at Ukraine. It detonated first through Ukrainian tax software, but EternalBlue does not recognize borders, and the worm escaped worldwide. Now here is the question that the entire sequence of events forces into the open. If the NSA had disclosed this vulnerability to Microsoft instead of building a weapon from it, none of this happens. The patch that Microsoft released in March 2017 took weeks to develop and distribute. If the NSA had reported CVE 2017-144 when they discovered it, Microsoft would have had months or years to close the hole before anyone weaponized it. Instead, the NSA made a choice that intelligence agencies call a vulnerability equity decision. Weigh the intelligence value of keeping the flaw secret against the risk of someone else finding and using it. They kept it secret. Then it was stolen, and the stolen tool became the engine of 2 of the worst cyber attacks in history. EternalBlue is still in active use today, more than 8 years after the patch was released, because millions of unpatched systems still exist worldwide, and criminal groups, ransomware crews, and state-aligned hackers continue to use the same stolen NSA code against them. A U.S. government advisory as recently as 2020 listed EternalBlue as one of the most exploited vulnerabilities in the world, nearly a decade after the patch was available. The world's hospitals, banks, and shipping lanes were shut down not by a foreign enemy's ingenuity, but by their own government's secret arsenal, left unguarded long enough to be taken. If you want to understand how that kind of failure keeps happening in cybersecurity and what it means for the systems we all depend on, there's another story that picks up exactly where this one ends, and what it reveals is even harder to explain away.